The effect of the ray of harmony through conflict in the modern world of nations. As we approach what some may regard as a highly controversial subject, I would remind you that we must attempt to see the picture whole in some such manner as the agents of the divine will see it, embracing the past of the nations involved, a past which is seldom good, seeing the effects of that past as they work out in the present, and as they are the inevitable result of the law of cause and effect, and attempting also to foresee the future in terms of lessons learned and new habits of a better nature established. I would remind you also that the governing principle of this ray is conditioning all the nations and has done so with increasing potency since the year 1850. Just in the same manner as this principle of conflict controls the battling life of the aspirant and of the world aspirant, the entire human family, so it must inevitably control the life of nations to a greater or lesser degree, according to their materialistic or their spiritual status, according to the type of energy which may be expressing itself through them, and according to the age of the nation under consideration. From certain angles, the youngest of the nations are Germany and Italy, for they only arrived at nationhood in the 19th century. The oldest nation with the clearest unified record is Japan. The United States of America is always regarded as a young nation, but from the angle of a unified central government, the two Axis powers are still younger, and this has had a definite bearing on their activities. In the world at this time, the two aspects of this fourth ray, the aspect of principle of conflict and the aspect of or principle of harmony, are struggling to bring about the liberation into equilibrium of mankind. Until quite lately, the principle of conflict has grown increasingly in power, yet as a result of this conflict, a definite trend towards harmony can be seen emerging in human thinking. The concept of harmony through the establishing of right human relations is slowly coming into recognition. The activities of mankind, and particularly of governments, have been ignobly selfish and controlled by the concepts of fighting, aggression, and competition for untold millennia. The territories of the planet have changed hands many times, and the Earth has been the playground of a long succession of conquerors. The heroes of the race, perpetuated in history, stone, and human thinking, have been the warriors, and conquest has been an ideal. The World War from 1914 to 1945 marked a culminating point in the work of the principle of conflict, and as I have shown, the results of this work are today inaugurating a new era of harmony and cooperation because the trend of human thinking is towards the cessation of conflict. This has an event of major importance and should be regarded as indicating a turning point in human affairs. This trend is impulsed by a weariness of fighting, by a changing rating as to the values in human accomplishment, and by a recognition that true greatness is not expressed through such activities as those of Alexander the Great, Julius Caesar, Napoleon, or Hitler, but by those who see life, humanity, and the world as one united whole, interrelated, cooperative, and harmonized. Those who struggle for this world unity and who educate the race in the principles of harmony and of right human relations will someday be recognized as the true heroes. The factor that must and will relate the principle of conflict to the expression of harmony and bring about the new world order, the new civilization and culture, is the trend and the voice of public opinion, and the opportunity offered to people everywhere to bring about social security and right human relations. It is not the government of any nation which will bring this about, but the innate rightness of the people themselves when they have been educated to see the issues clearly, the relationships which should be established, and the immense subjective unity of mankind. This will not come about without an intensive period of planned education, of a truly free press and radio, both free to speak the exact truth and to present the facts as they occur, without being controlled or influenced by governmental interference, pressure groups, religious organizations, or by any dictating parties or dictators. The sin of the Roman Catholic Church is its effort to dictate to people what they should think, theologically and politically, what they should do, read, and wear. This, to a still greater extent, is the crime of Russia. The mass of the people in the strictly Catholic countries are not as free in their thinking as those living in the Protestant lands. The Russian people know no freedom and have no opportunity to form their own point of view. Commercial interests and expediency impose restrictions in other countries. By means of these sources of control, the growth of true understanding is prevented, distorted, or stunted. Curiously enough, the intention of the dictating agents in both the Catholic Church and in Russia is basically good. They believe that the uneducated masses are not fitted to decide for themselves what they should hear, think, or decide. They must therefore be protected, in the one case by decrees and prohibitions from the Vatican via the organized priesthood, as to right attitude and right action to be followed without questioning, and in the other by withholding the truth as to events and happenings. But men are awakening everywhere, and given some sound leadership, which at present is not to be found in any country in the world, they can be trusted to swing the tide into a great harmonizing and unifying movement. As we study the effect of the principle of conflict as the instigator of eventual harmony in relation to the nations, let us remember that the widespread extent of the conflict is indicative of climax, that the points of crisis which express the conflict are today well known to all men, that a point of tension has now been reached, of which the United Nations is a symbol, which will eventually prove to be the agent that will bring about a point of emergence. I would ask you to keep these three phrases, descriptive of the working of the ray of harmony through conflict, constantly in mind in relation to developments in your own life, the life of your nation, or of any nation, and in the life of humanity as a whole. They embody the technique whereby the spiritual hierarchy of our planet brings good out of evil without originating the evil or infringing the free will of mankind. There are certain nations which are necessarily more responsive to the energy of this fourth ray than some of the others because it is either the energy which is conditioning their personality activities or that which conditions their soul expression. Forget not that nations are like individuals, expressive of soul and body. The nations responsive to this ray energy are India, whose personality or material ray is that of harmony through conflict. This could be seen in full expression in that unhappy country during the years 1947 to 1948. India is old and crystallized in her separativeness, in her myriads of diversified sects and religious groups, in her manifold languages, and in her ancient antagonisms. It will be long before there is any basic synthesis or harmony. There lies her problem, and unfortunately, she lacks pure, disinterested leadership. As is the case elsewhere in the world, party politics and religious cleavages condition her many peoples. The soul energy of India is that of the will to power or government, but that spiritual energy will not come into true activity until she has resolved her many differences and has returned to the old ways of spiritual understanding and of enlightened wisdom which distinguished her many centuries ago. India has nearly lost the light, but when she has passed through the coming points of crisis and has achieved a point of united tension, then she will find the door or point of emergence into light. The ray governing the soul expression of the German race is that of harmony through conflict, but her materialistic personality, focused in the emotional nature and not yet under control of the soul, is conditioned by the first ray of power. Germany as a nation is too young, immature, and negative to realize the true uses of power. She lacks the wisdom to use power, and her sense of inferiority based on youth leads her to misuse it when she has it. The German race is very old, and the German leaders during the past 100 years have confused racial issues and national ambitions. Races are basically subjective, and nations are basically objective. Their leaders have permitted the ideal of power, which is a great spiritual responsibility, to lead them to make the Germanic race synchronize with the German nation. It was this immaturity and this misguided and almost childish ambition which set the principle of conflict operating violently through the World War, in order to bring to an end the increasing nationalism of Germany and of all the nations. Great Britain is at the point of emergence from the nationalistic thought form. The United States and Russia are arriving, the first at the point of tension where the concept is concerned, and the other at the point of crisis. Germany's point of crisis and of tension led to the explosion of the World War. Nevertheless, after due process of pain, of re education, and of training in right human relations, The German people will discover their soul, and then the soul infused personality of the German people will demonstrate in a unique manner the significance of harmony. The basic and subjective synthesis of the Germanic race must not be confused with the separate nation of the German people, and the underlying emotional and sentimental unity, using the word sentimental in its correct sense, must not be confounded with territorial unity. There is a race and subjective unity between the British Commonwealth of Nations and the United States of America, but this in turn must not be confused with the outer national groupings and aims. Italy also is influenced by the ray of harmony through conflict because her personality or material expression is conditioned by this ray. During the World War, Italy had a king, a dictator, and a pope, and this produced a vortex of conflict in the highly intelligent Italian people. The dictator is no longer there. The monarchy has also disappeared, and only the continuing voice of the Vatican is left, but, curiously enough, receives less attention in Italy than in the other Catholic countries. Conflict during the centuries has done much for the Italian people, and their highly extroverted psychology has produced in them a balance which may prove most promising in the future. The conflict of thought through which they have passed during the past 100 years has worked well for them. Torn as they are by party politics, in revolt against ecclesiasticism, and lacking leadership, they are nevertheless well on the way to the resolution of their problem. When the fourth ray of harmony through conflict is the energy expressing itself through the soul, the indications are that the country concerned is nearing the path of discipleship or the path of probation. Austria and Germany are nearing the path of discipleship. Brazil is on the path of probation and will rapidly move forward. Austria is nearer true discipleship than is Germany, and spiritually, Austria has much eventually to give. Spiritual leadership will not be lacking once a measure of security and better living conditions have been assured. Germany has a bitter price to pay because her immaturity and childish interpretation of world affairs, her lack of thinking capacity, and her curious innate cruelty permitted the forces of evil, though temporarily, to work through Germany and precipitate the world conflict. But Germany will recover, provided she does not again permit herself to become a battleground. Owing to her strategic position in Central Europe, it is for this recovery that all men of goodwill must work. It is perhaps appropriate to point out here that the spiritual forces of the planet do not greatly fear a renewed outbreak of war upon the physical plane. There are many chances that it can be averted because the mounting revolt of the masses against physical plane war, the general fatigue of the nations, and the use of the United Nations councils for the ventilation of difficulties and problems may prove effective. Each of the three great powers has its own internal conflict, conditioned by its historical tradition, its national emphases, and its developed habits of thought, or as the case may be, of feeling. The major conflict in Great Britain at this time is between the reactionary thinkers and those unskilled laborers in the political field who favored the socialistic ideology. This conflict goes deep and is undermining and destroying old forms and producing intense national friction in all groups and parties. One group is fighting to preserve the old order. The other group is fighting fiercely to abolish all the old ways in the shortest time possible. Other groups are fighting for their various ideologies and complicating the problem. The interesting thing is that the conflict is largely between party leaders and their immediate convinced followers, with the mass of people questioning the wisdom, the capacity, and the activities of both groups, and slowly deciding that they like and desire neither of them, but lacking real leadership, they know not what to do. The predisposing characteristic of the British is a sense of justice, and it is for this that the people seek. They find, however, that neither the party has an effective plan or program, that both are animated by party politics, and that the interests of the people as a whole, which could be served by a wise coalition, are not of major importance to the present party leaders. This internal conflict is slowly, however, going to produce a harmony of purpose and of intention within the mind of the population. This will largely be the result of the increasing power of women in the land and their increasing penetration in municipal and national politics. The quality of the British historical retrospect has been predominantly masculine. Today, the balancing factor of feminine interpretation and the feminine point of view is needed and will be provided. Great Britain, from the angle of its personality or material problem, is governed by the energy array of will or power, whilst the soul of the country is conditioned by the ray of love wisdom. In this, you have the presentation of a positive and a negative energy. And when they are fused and blended, you will have a balance and a wisdom which is at present lacking. In France, where the contributing rays are both along the line of the intellect, you have necessarily and naturally a strong materialistic influence, and the conflict there is hard to resolve. It is ever the mind aspect which produces all the separativeness, the cleavages, and the differences in the human arena in France, making it the playground of untold numbers of conflicting ideas, diversity of groups, and of clashing personalities, and leading to an intense preoccupation with France and its welfare. There is small interest in anything else or in any other nations or groups except as they affect France or the French people. The French are in no way as yet ready to balance conflict with harmony, even interiorly. The qualities of the mind, pride, self centeredness, a separative attitude, a selfish planning, and a materialism which penetrates deep into the mass consciousness, are dominating in their activity and are focused upon the material well being of France. There is no dominant ideology, so that the conflict is not lifted on to the ideological level, and until a recognized idealism begins to sway the French mind and the mass consciousness, France cannot grow. There is no basic religious or spiritual sense to be found on a large scale, because the mind which can so inspiringly illumine the plane of the spirit is focused primarily upon the three worlds of material living. This pronounced activity of the intellect, of which the French are so proud, is largely responsible for the situation in the political and economic fields in France, plus the difficulties which they share with all the nations which were implicated in the war. Any prospect of internal harmony is still far away, but it will come. Forget not what I wrote much earlier in one of my books, that it is France which will eventually reveal the true nature of the soul, or of the psyche, and inaugurate the era of true esoteric psychology. To do this, she must inevitably find her own soul, and in finding it through the medium of the illumined mind, she will bring light to humanity. The conflict now raging in France will eventually be resolved into harmony, and France will awaken to the higher spiritual values. Once her soul ray of pure knowledge is active, it will dominate her personality or material ray of active intelligence, once the most powerful of all the rays. The task of the ray of harmony through conflict is to bring this about, thus releasing France into the light. In the United States, this fourth energy is peculiarly active because of the conflict of races, nations, ideas, political theories, immature development, corrupt politics, and childish selfishness. This is more prevalent among the leaders in the municipalities and in politics than it is among the masses of little people in every state, who are basically sound, though easily misled by their so called leaders. The southern states are, however, almost unbelievably degenerated and deluded. Remember always, as we look at these various nations dispassionately, that we are concerned with the same trends and ideas which are to be found in each individual aspirant, the conflict of ingrained personality habits and thoughts and faults with a steadily increasing soul pressure. The United States, though one of the younger nations, is owing to the many racial types represented, one of the oldest. This curious balancing must inevitably lead to a rapid development with a consequent assumption of power, the growing incentive to love, and a shouldering of responsibility. The conflict in the United States between a love of freedom, which amounts almost to irresponsibility and license, and a growing humanitarian ideology which will result in world service and non separateness. The rays of energy governing the United States are the sixth ray of idealism, which is the energy of the country's personality, and the second ray of love wisdom. which governs the soul of the country. I would here point out to you that it is the soul ray of the United States which relates it to Great Britain. The sixth ray personality energy at the present stage of unfoldment produces an idealism which requires transmuting and changing from an idealism intensely preoccupied with the preservation of a high standard of living and physical comfort to an idealistic appreciation of the real spiritual values. These are at present veiled and hidden in the material philosophy of the country. The youthful interpretation of this idealism can be seen in the complete conviction of the American people that everything in the United States is better than anything anywhere else, in its willingness to tell all the world what should or should not be done, in its revolt from all controls, in its unthinking acceptance of any information which falls in with its preconceived ideas and prejudices. The mature aspect of American idealism leads its people to a prompt response to the good, the beautiful, and the true, to the expression of an active humanitarianism and an evocative spiritual approach to reality. It is interesting to note the unusual alignment of ray energies to be found at this time in the United States. Those are the energy of the soul, ray of love wisdom, or ray 2, the energy of the personality, the ray of idealism, ray 6, and the energy relating the two, the ray of harmony through conflict, or ray 4. These rays, 2, 4, 6, are all on the second line of spiritual energy and lack all the stiffening and strengthening dualities of the first line of ray energy, 1, 3, 5, 7, which are governed by will or power. The American civilization, with all its clamor of youthful precocity, is in reality the heir of the passing sixth ray civilization, the Piscean. Therefore, you have here the reason for the tendency of the American people to adopt violently conditioning idealisms and ideologies. It is the idealistic tendency in conflict with pronounced materialistic trends of this particular modern era which will finally evoke the harmony, which will liberate the spirit of America, which will reveal to its people that it is one world, and which will enable the people of this land to harmonize with the rest of the world and draw forth the loving response of other nations. It is for this that the men of goodwill must work. Russia is, if you could but realize it, a battleground today within her own sealed walls. Her Iron Curtain is to Russia what the Monroe Doctrine was to the American people. In connection with all the great powers, the USSR, the USA, and the UK, certain major conflicts are being specifically precipitated. These will fundamentally affect the destiny of humanity. These three nations constitute the 3 points of a most potent world triangle of energy. And once there is a free circulation and a true understanding established between them, then world peace will be assured and the Christ can come. This understanding and this free harmony, if I may use such a term, will come as the result of each of the three nations arriving at a real measure of internal harmony as a result of their own particular conflict, and then moving forward in an effort to harmonize with each other and the rest of the world. Russia has the same personality ray as the United States, and her seventh ray soul, conditioned by the ray of order, is closely related to the personality ray of Great Britain, the first ray of will or power. The will aspect of divinity works out on the physical plane as the seventh ray of order, or of conformity to the inner divine will. The interior problem of the USSR is the conflict raging between the imposed, arrogant will of a handful of powerful dictators and the fluid, unstable, and ignorant reaction of a people from whom the truth is constantly withheld. They therefore have to fight blindly for their freedom, to fight instinctively and without knowledge of the facts. They are not yet waging a successful fight. The point, however, which is of major importance to us, is the recognition that each of these three nations is distinguished by A. A similarity of problem, B. A battleground which is leading to the formation of a triangle of relationships brought about through the principle of conflict. The similarity of problems consists in the fact that each of these three nations is essentially composite in nature and is formed by an amalgamation of many nations, of many people speaking many different languages, and is consequently staging a great experiment in fusion. One, the UK, is the nucleus or the living germ of the British Commonwealth of Nations, wherein a great experiment in free government is being tried out. This gives complete internal freedom and choice to each related dominion, plus an equally complete and free interrelationship. The dominions are all of them independent nations, but belong to a united commonwealth. A pattern is thereby presented for world consideration. The USA, the second, is a fusing center wherein all nationalities are represented and are being slowly blended into a miniature one humanity. A great experiment in right relationships is being undertaken and is making real progress. A culture and a civilization will emerge which will be the result of right human relations and which can provide a world pattern in relationships. I refer here to the presentation of democracy. There is nothing satisfactory yet in the presentation of the dreamed of democracy. France and Great Britain are equally democratic and more successful because more mature and experienced, but the melting pot of the USA will provide eventually the outstanding experiment in right relations because of its many races and nationalities, all blended together within the borders of one country. The USSR is also seeking to blend and unite into one great national project many diverse nations and races, European and Asiatic, and the effort is still largely embryonic. In Russia, a world ideology is being wrought out, which, when proven, can be presented to the world as a model system. This, however, will not come as a result of dictatorship, nor can it be presented aggressively to the world. Russia is in reality, whether she realizes it or not at present, undertaking a great experiment in education, and, in spite of evil methods and sinning against the soul of human freedom, eventually this educational process will prove convincing to the world and provide a world model. This can only take place when the present group of dictators and arrogant men have passed away or been forced out of power by an awakening people. In these three great nations, therefore, the three major divine aspects are being brought into manifestation, thus laying the foundation for the New World Order. All three are of equal importance. In Great Britain, the right human government, will or power. In the USA, right human relations, or love wisdom. And in the USSR, right use of the mind, or intelligence. This must be remembered and taught. Men of goodwill everywhere should work for a closer relationship between these three peoples. These 3 points of a divine triangle of energies should not be isolated points, each holding its own point of tensions. They should be related points, each point distributing strengthening energy to the other points and admitting a free circulation between all points around the triangle. These great world problems are also being worked out in each of these three nations. One, in Great Britain, the problem of socialism is being resolved, and the sound judgment of the people will eventually balance the two conditions of a socialist program and free enterprise. This needs doing, for the extreme position in either case is untenable. This today presents a conflict which all the world is watching. The transition period between group living, in the true and spiritual sense, and the present and past period of an intense individualism is not easy, and in Great Britain, the whole matter is being put to the test. The bridge will be built. Second, in the USA, you have the problem of the relationship between capital and labor awaiting solution. The conflict is fierce, but a compromise will eventually be worked out if capital concedes certain arrogant powers, recognizes the rights of other human beings, and demonstrates less selfish greed, and if labor will work with less selfishness, prove less exacting, and evince a more understanding spirit. The bridge between these two great groups must and will be built. Third, in the USSR, you have the problem of a leveling of the masses in all classes. This leveling has produced a low standard of living, and the work to be done is to raise more than to bridge. This leveling produces serious conflict, and one that is little realized by those who cannot penetrate into the sealed citadel, which is Russia. It is really a conflict between the mounting human spirit and the force of the totalitarian regime which seeks to hold it down, killing individualism. The innate strength of the human spirit to rise has never yet failed, and this conflict will provide the agent in harmonizing many factors. Within the comedy of nations, certain of them have ever been prime agents for producing conflict. This is largely owing to their fiery temperament and their strong emotional bias and condition. The Polish and the Irish are prime catalysts of conflict. They're constantly instigating difficulties between peoples. Such has ever been their history. French aggression in the Middle Ages has also caused difficulty, and in later days, Germany became the prime agent of conflict. Today, the Jewish people are engineering trouble, and it is interesting to note that the main contention in the past of Poland, lately of the Irish, and today of the Jewish is territory, thus evidencing a most distorted sense of values. There is in the last analysis but one world and one humanity, and in a shorter time than you may think, boundaries and territories will mean but little. World citizenship will be the only factor of importance. The Jewish are governed by the third ray of active intelligence, the energy which permeates and controls matter or substance. They were also, during the years immediately following the war, under the control of a glamour imposed by the Zionist dictators, who were attempting, somewhat unsuccessfully, to be the Jewish people what Stalin and his group, to be to the Jewish people what Stalin and his group, and Hitler and his gang, had been to their people. They worked through the same methods, terrorizing, withholding information, browbeating their opponents, making false claims, and bribing and corrupting. They were and are a minority, but a powerful minority because of their great wealth and their being in positions of power. They are claiming a land to which they have no possible right, which the Jews have ignored for 2,000 years. Their attitude is perhaps the culminating aggressive action of the age and marks a climaxing point. It has produced a serious world tension, but out of this good may come and a point of emergence for mankind be reached. The issue of aggression can be more clearly seen because of their activities. Very few lands today are in the possession of their original inhabitants, and if restoration is made to all original inhabitants, which is not possible, an impossible situation would be brought about just as legitimate as the Zionist position. If the Zionist claims are to be considered, and they have been, they in their turn should realize that if the Old Testament is to be believed, they originally took the land of Palestine away from its original owners nearly 3,000 years ago at the point of the sword and through an unprovoked aggression. This conflict, which the Zionists have precipitated, is basic and useful. It constitutes a test case, being based upon physical play and aggression, being fought with the most violent emotional disturbance, and being founded upon completely illogical premises. The Jew has ever been, could he but usefully remember it, the symbol of humanity, evolving, seeking, restless, materialistic, separative, and greedy. He is the symbol of the mass consciousness, presenting this consciousness in an exaggerated form. He is ever seeking and searching a home and is the true prodigal son of the New Testament. Curiously enough, the Jews have never been a fighting race since the time of the sorry story of the conquest of the early tribes in Palestine. They have been persecuted and repudiated down the centuries, but have retaliated simply by moving on. The wandering Jews seeking a home, wandering humanity, saying always, I must arise and go to my father. The motive given to the prodigal son in the gospel story is a strictly material one, and we have here an outstanding instance of the prophetic knowledge of the Christ. The Jewish people have not only repudiated the Messiah, which their race produced, but they have forgotten their unique relation to humanity. They forgot that millions in the world today have suffered as they have suffered, and that, for instance, there are 80% of other people in the concentration camps of Europe and only 20% Jews. The Jew, however, fought only for himself and largely ignored the sufferings of his fellow men in the concentration camps. I have enlarged thus upon the Jewish conflict because it is the symbol of all past conflicts in human history, based upon universal selfishness and the greed of underdeveloped humanity, because the crucial test of the nations and of the United Nations Assembly is to be found in the decisions which they made and may make concerning Palestine. The test, as far as the nations are concerned, lies in their willingness to give refuge to the Jews. Such a refuge would have been offered it if the partitioning of Palestine had been refused. The unwillingness of the nations to admit the Jews, though many have willingly offered, and particularly the refusal of the United States to admit them, is separative, wrong, and based upon political expediency. The test, as far as the United Nations is concerned, was whether they would endorse partition, thus perpetuate the spirit of aggression and territorial greed against which the forces of light were arrayed in the last war. The United Nations has already made a major mistake by their original admittance of Russia, a totalitarian power, as was Germany, to their councils. Now they have made another. In the first mistake, they precipitated into the United Nations the element of conflict and the spirit of fanatical imposition, which is distinctive of the totalitarian ideology. In this second case, through the endorsement of partition, they perpetuate the ancient technique of taking what is wanted with force of arms if necessary from the rightful owners. It was a test for the United States, and it is for the American Jews who have created the situation, with relatively little help or endorsement from the Jews of other nations. The United States, urged by expediency, by the financial weight of the Zionists, and by the strategic position of Palestine, have thrown the weight of their influence into the conflict on the side of aggression and of territorial theft. They could have worked for the principle of harmony and permitted time and the non-separativeness of the nations to adjust and solve the Jewish problem. More I will not say. Symbolic nature of this basic world problem and its dynamic importance to humanity have led me thus to enlarge. The decision anent the Jews is one of hierarchical importance, owing to the karmic relation of the Christ to the Jewish race, to the fact that they repudiated him as the Messiah and are still doing so, and of the interpretive nature of the Jewish problem as far as the whole of humanity is concerned.